I hope you're all keeping well. Thank you for joining us today for the second in our series of online travel talks, this time on Eastern Turkey. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Rahul. I'm one of the co-founders of Travel the Unknown. And again, we've had a really good level of interest in this talk, and I'm confident you'll come away with a deeper understanding and appreciation for this lesser visited part of Turkey. I'm very pleased to welcome back Diana today. She's spoken for us on a number of occasions, and she will certainly give you more of an insight on this region. She's a real expert, and I'll talk a little bit more about Diana a little later. So just a few words on the housekeeping. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Okay. Yep, so if everybody could keep their microphones muted, please, and videos disabled, this will ensure that we have good quality audio and video for the duration of the talk. Regarding questions, after Diana and myself have spoken, there will be time for questions and answers. These should be submitted via the chat function in Zoom. So if you're using a laptop or a desktop computer, you should see a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. If you're using a tablet or a mobile device, you may have to access the chat option via the participants button. When submitting questions, if you could please send them to myself, I should appear as Rahul TTU host. If you could send them to me, and then I will go through the questions and we'll try to answer as many as possible in the time that we have. And if we don't get to everyone, then I'm very sorry, and hopefully we'll be able to answer those in due course. Another thing is, obviously, I'm aware that there's a lot of concern about COVID-19 and what impact this might have on future travel. But as this is an inspirational talk about Eastern Turkey as a destination, it would be good if any questions are related to that, to Eastern Turkey. Hopefully the talk will go smoothly, but as usual, we're dependent on technology. So please bear with us if there are momentary freezes or if the audio quality drops off temporarily. So I'm just going to introduce a little bit about ourselves, about Travel the Unknown, for those who don't know us so well. We are a tour operator, and we specialize in small group tours up to a maximum of 12 people, as well as tailor-made and private tours. We offer an intimate, personal knowledge of these destinations. A member of the team has traveled extensively to these parts of the world, including Eastern Turkey. So, and over the years, we work with some of the best local partners and passionate guides in the region. Over the years, we've been recommended by major guidebooks such as Lonely Planet, Rough Guide, Brat Guide, etc. And we're also fully financially protected and atol bonded. We were very proud winners of the British Travel Awards in 2018 and came runners up last year. So hopefully next year we'll get a chance to go for the 2021 award. We run a number of tours in Eastern Turkey in particular. Here's some of them on your screen. We run an Eastern Turkey Explorer trip, which is quite an in-depth tour of that region. We do an archaeology themed tour, which focuses on the main archaeological sites in Eastern Turkey. And then we do a much more condensed version of that region, a 6-day tour of Eastern Turkey, and our Eastern Turkey Snapshot tour. We do offer other tours in Turkey as well, and it's very popular sometimes for people to bolt on tours, or if they want to customize a package taking in both regions. We do an archaeology of Western Turkey tour as well, a Silk Road trip, and for those who have not visited Cappadocia, which is incredible landscapes in central Turkey, the Magic of Cappadocia. And just a few words very quickly before I hand over to Diana, just to introduce a little bit more about Diana. I mean, she is a real expert in the region. She's a Middle East cultural expert. She's spent over 30 years specializing in the Middle East and Turkey. She's been published by numerous publications, including the Sunday Times, The Guardian, the FT, and BBC, just to name a few. And most recently, she was also invited to join the Middle East Institute, a Washington-based think tank, as a non-resident scholar. She's the author of several books as well on the Middle East. Her newest book describing how Islamic architecture influenced many of Europe's iconic buildings is now featured in her new book, which is called Stealing from the Saracens, and I believe it'll be out in August. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Diana, who will talk you through her experiences in Eastern Turkey for the next 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll come back for a Q&A after. Over to you, Diana.
So hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. And thank you too to Travel the Unknown for giving me the chance to talk about one of my favorite places. And I'm going to take you on this virtual journey and showing you various pictures. And I'm going to start off in the southeast and move northwards up into the northeast. I won't be covering Cappadocia and the central areas because they are actually slightly better known. I'm going to be focusing on the less well-known areas where actually, come to think of it, social distancing will be great because there are no crowds there, there's nobody there. Most of the sites where you go, you're pretty much often the only person there. So it'll just be your own small group. So pretty much very well suited to these times. So I'm going to start with a place called Göbekli Tepe. Now in Turkish that means hill of the pot belly. And the reason for that is it's actually a man-made mound a little bit north of Gaziantep. And people didn't know what it was to begin with. It was discovered back in the 90s, but it took a lot of excavation. And the mysteries of it have only started to be unraveled fairly recently. So it was only in 2018 that it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of its massive significance to the human history of the area. And it's so astonishing that people's understanding of history has had to be completely revolutionized, because this is a series of stone circles, and people imagine that the purpose was religious in some way. People talk about it as the first temple, and it predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. And nobody knows exactly why it was built, by whom, what ceremonies took place here. But the extraordinary thing is that what it shows is that man built a sacred site 3,000 years before he built the first city, which is also in Turkey, in Çatalhöyük. So it really is a mystery. And of course, at this stage, man was just a hunter-gatherer. He didn't have settlements. So why did he find it necessary to build such extraordinarily difficult monolithic stone circles like this? So there are about 20 of them so far that have been seen from satellite images, of which only a handful have been excavated. So this is an absolutely astonishing site that reminds us that this is Upper Mesopotamia. This is basically one of the big, massive civilizations, one of the huge superpowers of the ancient world, where everything began in human history. Now, the theme of Eastern Turkey is mountains and rivers, castles and churches. These are the things that dominate the landscape. And the two huge rivers that have their headwaters in Eastern Turkey are the Tigris and the Euphrates. And when you actually fly over Eastern Turkey in a plane, you'll be very struck by the sheer quantity of water when you look down. And very powerful landscapes, as you can see here. Now, this is the Euphrates as it wanders through some of the empty areas of central Anatolia. And the Euphrates, the name of it actually, it's a very long, slow river that carries a lot of silt. And so the name originally means it's connected with fertility, because it brings fertility to the areas where it flows. Whereas the Tigris is much shorter and faster flowing. And as a result, it has a bigger volume, actually. And one of the things that Turkey has been doing, of course, since it controls the headwaters of the Tigris and the Euphrates, so this is Upper Mesopotamia, as we're saying, is that it has been building a series of dams in order to make Turkey self-sufficient with hydroelectric power, and in order to irrigate the land. And so what's happened, of course, in the creation of all these dams is that you have huge amounts of flooding. And archaeological sites have been caught up in the flooding. In fact, well over 50 quite significant archaeological sites have been flooded. And one of the most major ones, perhaps, is a place called Zeugma, which is a Roman a garrison city of the 2nd and 3rd century, and all the mosaics from Zeugma were rescued. It was a race, basically, before the reservoirs filled up behind the dam to rescue them. and they were successfully rescued, and a purpose-built museum now in Gaziantep displays all of these astonishing mosaics, very, very high quality. This one is known as the Gypsy Girl. Nobody quite knows who it is. Some people say it might even be Alexander the Great. Nobody knows. But the museum that has been built in Gaziantep is a marvel. It's the best mosaic museum anywhere in the world. Now, when we talk about Upper Mesopotamia, we need to remember as well that, of course, you know, nowadays we have modern boundaries between Turkey and Syria, whereas, of course, originally it was all one place, and you only got to look at the architecture to see this. So in Gaziantep, this is the souk of Gaziantep. Architecturally, it's exactly the same as Aleppo, and that's because it had the same governor, the same person, built the same cities. It was all built on the same wealth of the Silk Road. Going east, everything was built on trade, and so you see similarities all the time between the way the cities are, the way they're constructed, the way they're built up, the way the mosques are, the way the souks are huddled around the mosques, the way organically the cities have grown up. And because of the flooding, it does mean, from a touristic point of view, that visiting some of the sites can be quite fun, because you have to go by boat these days. So the boat trips take you, for example, past flooded settlements. So here you've got a minaret sticking out from the lake now. And the settlements are always, obviously the Turkish government compensates the inhabitants and builds them new villages further up out of danger of flooding. But it does make visiting some of these places remarkably pleasant, actually, and there are new cafes along the edges of the lake, and so you can actually very much enjoy visiting some of these places in a very different sort of way. You don't have to go everywhere in a motor vehicle. And here we have more water. This is a sacred pool now in Urfa. We're still very much in the southeast, close to the Syrian border. And Urfa is reputedly the birthplace of Abraham. And Abraham is revered in all three religions, by the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. And he's thought of as the first monotheist, if you like. And so here we have sacred pools very close to, and in fact, the sacred pool of Abraham, one of them is called. And what's so striking about these sites, all of which, of course, are pilgrimage sites, is how everybody enjoys themselves there. Everybody comes there to have a good time. So you can see there a rowing boat on one of the sacred lakes. People picnic, people sit in the cafes. They enjoy themselves. It's very noticeable that there's none of this sort of hush of sanctity that we perhaps associate with some of the Christian sites. And here is another flooding issue, if you like. Here we've moved to the Tigris. This is a very controversial place called Hasan Cave, and the local population here was very against the dam that was being built. And because they knew obviously it would flood their area, it would mean they would have to move out. But it is in fact going ahead, and the reservoir started filling last July, so it's currently about 25% full. And when it is completely full, it will actually be one of the largest reservoirs in Europe, and the level of the water will reach just to the top of the cliff there that you're looking at. But all the key historical monuments have been very carefully moved. The ancient mosque, the ancient tomb, have been moved up to the new settlement. So, of course, although it is very difficult, the Turkish authorities are trying very hard to keep as much of the character as they can, and they're talking about investing in a cable car, for instance, and still trying to attract tourism to the area. Of course, the other reason behind the dams is not just the hydroelectric power, it's also the fertility of the area. In a way, they're kind of bringing back the Fertile Crescent to this part. Of course, the Fertile Crescent was always built on the banks of the Tigris and the Euphrates. And these are cotton plants. Turkish cotton is, of course, famous. Textile industry is huge in Turkey, and it does bring a lot of employment to the area. So there is an element of social engineering in it, in that it's trying to, you know, these are very poor parts of Turkey where there's been very little investment, and the Turkish government has very much brought a huge amount of investment to these areas, and has brought employment, which has meant that the transport infrastructure has been revolutionized. There are now fast trains, good roads. All of this is so different to when I first visited Turkey, where you know, to be honest, it was a fairly tough kind of place to visit, because the facilities were so bad, the roads were full of potholes, and the hotels were pretty rock bottom. Whereas now, what you have is a place like Mardin. Now, Mardin sits right on the border with Syria. So what you're looking at there in the distance is actually the fertile plain of Mesopotamia. That is all Syria in there. And you can see how dry that part of it is, where of course, the irrigation and the agriculture hasn't spread. And the meal that we're eating here is very typical of this part of Turkey, where in fact the local cooks here are all women. They are excellent cooks, and of course, as ever with Turkish cuisine, one of the oldest cuisines in the world, the food is exquisite and all based on very fresh, beautiful ingredients with excellent wine to go with it too. So it's been transformed as an area you can now stay in fabulous boutique hotels like this one in Midyat. This is a converted bishop's palace with about 15-20 rooms, and you can sit out on the terrace and have your evening meal there, listening to the church bells ringing out and mixing with the call to prayer, because places like Midyat still have small Christian communities, and so they're still active there. And you can visit local monasteries like this one, Deir Zafaran, which is a very thriving industry. They obviously are keen to sell their own produce. They have to support themselves. So Deir Zafaran, this monastery, actually has the most wonderful shop and cafe attached, where they have fabulous different flavors, exotic flavors of ice cream like pomegranate, and wonderful local produce, olive oil. They make their own handicrafts, cushions and things. I mean, really beautiful things that you can't find elsewhere, even jewelry. And this is one of the local bishops in one of the other monasteries. They're, as I said, small but very active communities. And this is another one of the monasteries that has been revived. It's called Mar Augen, and again, it's up on a ridge overlooking Syria. And the monk who brought it all back to life, Father Joachim, is originally spent 14 years in Holland. His English is absolutely excellent, and he loves having visitors, loves showing them around. And he's very much part of the local community. That's what I like to see here. So he invites Muslims to come in and tour the monastery, shows them what he's done. I mean, they have a local football team. It's all very nice to see. It's on fairly small scale, but it's the sort of thing that needs to be encouraged, obviously. Now, moving further north out of the southeast, we're now heading northwards to the very famous Nemrut Dağ, as it's called. And this man-made tumulus here is high up on a mountain, 2,200 meters. And it's the tomb, it was discovered, of a slightly power-crazed king who had his own small kingdom, the Commagene kingdom it's called. And in his desire to immortalize himself, he had this incredible terrace built of himself surrounded by gods, so that he obviously completely had delusions of grandeur. And so here is the sort of Hittite lion, if you like. He likes to think of himself as one of the great ancestors of the Hittites. And this is the goddess of fortune, taiki, with a headdress full of abundance and fruits. And the view from the top of Nemrut Dağ is over the lake Ataturk, which is the biggest of the lakes on the Euphrates. And this just gives you some scale. So we're up here at 2,200 meters, looking down at the vast Lake Ataturk, which has flooded so many of the sites. So Zoidma, as I mentioned, is one of the sites that's been flooded. And also in this area, now you start to see castles mainly of local chieftains who are trying to dominate their immediate areas. They're all incredibly well preserved, and you can go and visit them all. And we're now properly in the Kurdish areas. And so you have, again, a variety of places where you can stay. This is one of the simpler ones. The Kurdish host here has adapted his own home to be a small hotel, and they love to welcome people. Again, the Kurdish hospitality is enormous. They're delighted to see people and very keen to show them this remote part of Turkey. Very much in the Kurdish areas now. We also have moved to Lake Van. Lake Van is enormous and a very, very special lake. It's about 7 times the size of Lake Geneva, and the water is very special. It's actually completely sealed. It has no outlet anymore because of the volcanoes that surround it. And straight in front of you there is the highest volcano, which is 4,000 meters. And you can climb that. I did in fact manage that about 10 years ago. But the water itself at Lake Van has this extraordinary quality. It's 6 times saltier than the sea. It's very, very alkaline. And when you swim in it, the silkiness on your skin is absolutely fabulous. Local fishermen actually trail their dirty washing out from behind their boats. And when it emerges, it's as if it's been through the best fabric conditioner that money can buy. And one of the islands on Lake Van is of Akdamar, and this is the cathedral of Akdamar, which is now reminding us that, of course, the Armenian kingdom was here back in the 10th century. This is the beginning. This is the earliest Armenian kingdom, and you can see the quality of the stonemasonry work here. The Armenians were excellent stonemasons, and this is a detail here of Jonah and the whale. This is Jonah having been spat out by the whale and dangling from a tree. And the stonemasonry designs here are some of the elements that have found their way to Europe into some of our Gothic cathedrals. It's a subject I've been studying a lot over the last year. And here is one of the volcanoes that has actually been responsible for Lake Van not being able to empty itself. And this is also called Nemrut Dağ. It's the second Nemrut Dağ in Turkey. And we're now inside the crater of Nemrut Dağ. Looking down inside, you have a hot lake and a cold lake. So you can camp by the side of these lakes and wake up in the morning and decide whether you want a hot bath or a cold bath. Moving further east to Mount Ararat. Now, Mount Ararat really does take your breath away. It dominates the landscape from 50 kilometers in all directions, and it almost straddles 3 countries. It's right on the border with Iran and Armenia, but so you can actually do an ascent from the Armenian side, but the ascent from the Turkish side is actually the easiest one. And so I was able to fulfill my lifelong ambition of actually climbing up there. It is snow covered all the year round, and in the summer only the top third is snow covered. And as you start to go up the lower foothills, the lower slopes, you encounter a lot of Kurdish nomads who are living there with their cows and a few chickens. And again, incredibly hospitable. They invite you in, they give you tea, they give you food. And then as you continue your climb, your guides will take you up there with horses and provisions. And it starts to get rocky as you go above the tree line, you get into the rocky terrain. where it gets pretty exciting, I can tell you, at the top, where it's completely in the snow. You're camping 3 nights on the mountain, and you know, you have to wear crampons and things to walk across the snow. And this is afterwards. This is on having been up to the summit, because you have to get up there at dawn to be able to come down again before any avalanches begin. And so, as you can see, I'm looking pretty relieved there. And I don't know if you can make it out in the slide behind, but there's a trail in the snow there, a single trail, which is where I slid all the way down that final section in order to avoid the rocks and make it a bit faster, because my knees were hurting a bit by that stage. And I have a good friend who has vowed to do it for his 80th birthday. So it's never too late. I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as fit at all, but you know, just by plodding along and putting one foot in front of the other, I was able to do it. And it certainly was the experience of a lifetime. And according to legend, both in the Old Testament and in the Quran, Noah's Ark came to rest on the slopes of Mount Ararat. And so this is what you'll be shown as what people tell you is the remains of Noah's Ark. And there's a small museum close to it that explains all about it. It's actually incredibly convincing. The measurements fit, you know, to what the Old Testament explains in the Bible. It's absolutely fascinating, and to sort of marvel, was this or wasn't this true? Moving further north now, we come into the Georgian territories, and this is the castle. It's known as the Devil's Castle, that belonged to one of the Georgian lords in the Middle Ages. Again, you've got lakes and rivers everywhere, lakes, rivers, and castles, and almost no people visiting these places. So local people are delighted to see newcomers arrive, and you'll always be offered tea and any form of hospitality. So now we're heading a little bit further north again, and this is yet another river. This is the natural river, the Arpachai, that forms the boundary between Turkey and what was the ancient Soviet Union and is now Armenia. And the site that you've come here to see is called Ani, which is a very famous Armenian city. It's known as the city of 100 gates and 1,000 churches. It was a huge, very powerful city that was only rivaled by places like Constantinople and Cairo and Baghdad. And again, you can see the skill of the stonemasons, the beautiful blind arches, the little oculus up in the pediment there, you know, all these elements that actually then found their way across into our cathedrals in a very fascinating way. And the more rivers now, as we head even further north, this is the Choru River. People can do whitewater rafting here. And you can just about make out there a cafe that's overhanging the river, where you can sit and listen to the rushing water running by underneath. And in these incredibly heavily treed and very, very green mountains are the remains of many Georgian churches. And so here we have one of them that's quite remote, that has fallen into ruin, but not all of them are ruined. Some of them have been taken on as local mosques and are still in use by local villagers. It's a mixture, but each one is completely different. And again, you can see the skill of the stonemasons here, some of whose skills found their way into Europe. And so I'm going to end now on the final slide, again, right in the northeast now. We've come up to the Sumela Monastery, which always reminds me of something out of Tibet, the way it clings to the cliff there with the mists above and the greenery. And this is a monastery that was founded in the 6th century, very, very ancient, and was in use until 1923 with the exchange of populations after modern Turkey was formed, and the exchange of populations between the Greeks and the Turks. And so I'm going to end there. Of course, we're now very close to the Black Sea, very, very green, completely different world again, where you've got tea growing on the slopes, and a very, very different feel. I mean, you couldn't feel more different than from Istanbul. So as you'll have discovered, I mean, Eastern Turkey is full of surprises. it will take your breath away as a place. And in spite of my Arabist roots, I have to say that Turkey has always been my first love. So I would urge you to go and discover it for yourselves. Thank you very much. And now I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Diana. Apologies again to everybody about the audio quality. I was aware that it was cutting out quite a bit, so apologies for that. I'll keep my video off as well, and again, if everybody could make sure that their video and mics are also on mute for the time being. Already a few people have asked questions via the chat, so if you do have any questions, if you could please submit them via the Zoom chat. So Diana, a question that we've got is, what is the security situation like on the ground in Eastern Turkey? And what would you have to say on that?
Well, it's very varied. It depends exactly where you are. But in my experience, basically any problems in security on the ground are not going on anywhere in the tourist areas. I mean, I have never ever, even back in the 80s when the whole area was actually under martial law, driving around to the places that a tourist would go to, I never saw a single thing. You'd have to go really into very remote tiny villages where frankly a tourist wouldn't go in order to encounter anything at all. So it's one of those places where, as a tourist, you simply won't be aware of anything. And I mean, I've been back to Eastern Turkey pretty much every year, actually. I try to go back every year, and I'm always amazed at how unchanged it is, except for the better, actually. And one of the amazing surprises, I must just tell you, is the astonishing level of healthcare, since everybody's concerned about their health at the moment. So my husband actually had a nasty accident, had a fall when he lost his footing on something in Hasankeyf, and we took him to hospital, and he had incredible treatment. He had a concussion, he had an MRI scan. It was all completely free, because for all foreigners, any kind of emergency treatment is totally free. This was in a spanking new hospital with excellent doctors who were an absolute delight to work with. So, it's just not what you expect. In fact, one of the people we were traveling with was a doctor. He was astonished and said, wow, the NHS would never offer anything to this level.
Great, thanks. And then just another question, and you may or may not be able to answer this. Has it been determined for sure whether Abraham was born in Urfa in Turkey or Ur in Iraq? I don't know whether you've...
Well, you know what it's like. It's like John the Baptist's head is in about 8 different locations, I think, at the last count. I mean, everybody claims these things. I mean, certainly the local tradition in Urfa is very strong. I mean, ask anybody there and they'll tell you, yes, of course it's Urfa. So, I mean, that's the thing. And I mean, Abraham's path, you may have heard of, this long distance walk also starts in Urfa and heads south down to where he died, down in Hebron.
Sure. And again, would you know, with the development of the dams drawing water away from rivers, is this causing any issues regarding irrigation, would you know of, or?
Well, yes, of course, the people downstream are always complaining. So Syria and Iraq do complain that obviously the flow of the Tigris and the Euphrates is less, inevitably. But it varies from year to year. It depends on how much snow there's been, and it's true that with a bit of global warming and things, there has been less snow, and so it is an issue. But having said that, I mean, from what I've seen, certainly in Syria, that the Euphrates flows very strongly through places like Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, and it's I mean, there's a lot of agricultural development along the banks of the river all the way down through Syria and Iraq, so they're clearly getting enough water for proper irrigation. A lot of the time it's actually to do with proper management of the water as well. I mean, and I have to say that neither Syria nor Iraq are great at management of their water. And before the wars, all of that was starting to be addressed with German engineers trying to come in and help them to do it better. So there is room for improvement, definitely.
Okay, and with regards to Göbekli Tepe, how much of it can be visited by tourists, and is it only the main circle that is undercover?
I haven't seen it since it's been covered, actually. The last time I went there, they hadn't put the roof up, so I don't know whether they've only put the roof over one of the main one that's been excavated. But I'm told that it's been done extremely well. But not that many people go to it. I mean, it's so relatively new that you know, you can go there and your little group of people will probably be the only people there.
Sure. No, I mean, it features obviously prominently on our various Eastern Turkey trips because, I mean, as you said, it's possibly one of the most important sites in the world, let alone just in Turkey. And yeah, I mean, it is the highlight for many people, absolutely. When would you say is the best time of year to visit Eastern Turkey?
Right. Well, because of the snow, actually, it's definitely not a place to go to in the winter. So from sort of mid-October till April, it's pretty snowbound. So it's very much a summer destination. Probably June is a very good time. June, July, August, September are the best times to go.
Okay. And if one wanted to travel between some of the countries, for example, Eastern Turkey and Iran, I mean, how easy is it to travel between those two countries?
Well, if you can get a visa to go into Iran, then the borders are open. So it's all about, you know, your ability to get a visa. Obviously, you know, Turkey's no problem at all. Getting a visa is completely straightforward. You just do it all online. But Iran's obviously rather more complex.
Sure. And in terms of accommodation standards, I mean, what would your view be on that in that part of the world?
Well, as I said, it's completely been transformed. And so I'm just amazed at how beautiful some of the buildings are. You know, some of the older buildings have been converted very, very successfully. You know, in many places actually. So when you go further north, places like Kars have got very interesting, unusual hotels, and then some of the smaller villages have got beautiful wooden houses where you can stay. And the variety is what strikes you. I mean, there's just so much variety, and each place is so distinctive. So, and the food is excellent, of course, as Turkish food always is. It's really easy if you're a vegetarian because you know, the use of vegetables is so prolific. You know, everything is based around fresh fruit and vegetables, and so you really do, you eat and drink incredibly well because, of course, now that I've mentioned drink, of course, I'm reminded of the fact that Eastern Turkey is where wine was first cultivated. So it goes back a very long way, and Turkish wines are pretty good.
No, absolutely. And obviously, as you mentioned at the start, you know, Eastern Turkey is, you know, Turkey is a vast country, and the area, the southeastern part, is right to one end. I mean, how easy would you say is it traveling, say, from Istanbul, you know, all the way down to southeastern Turkey? Obviously, I know one can catch flights, and we do that on some of our tours. But generally, what is transport like throughout Turkey, in your experience?
Well, again, it's been revolutionized basically in recent years. I mean, yes, what most Turks do for long distance is the domestic airport network is incredible. So I mean, even, you know, relatively small places in Eastern Turkey have got their own airport with frequent flights. So, you know, I've flown from Istanbul to a place called Batman, which is quite close to Hasankeyf, for example, and it's a very easy thing to do. And of course, these airports are very small and therefore very unbusy. So you arrive and you're the only flight arriving. So everything is very quick and easy. And I really would recommend that. Having said that, of course, the train network has been improved as well. It doesn't necessarily come as far east as this on the really fast trains yet. But then, of course, you've also got the long distance coaches, which are clearly less comfortable, but very, very efficient. The long distance buses and coaches are incredibly well organized and punctual, and obviously incredibly cheap as well.
And could you elaborate a bit more on Hattusa? I mean, is it accessible?
Oh yes, I mean, obviously that wasn't what I was covering just now in my slides, but yes, I mean, Hattusha is obviously the Hittite capital, and the Hittites, again, you know, it's just one of the extraordinary, eye-opening sites of Eastern Turkey. The whole Hittite, you know, these are people who were the rivals, the mountain rivals of the ancient Egyptians, and when you go round the sites there, they're so huge, and you just have to marvel at how they built these fortresses using the natural contours of the rock. And there's a remarkable amount left, a lot of stone carving work, and you do get a real sense of a very, very powerful empire that was there, and it came to an end round about the same time as the fall of Troy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And just one other thing about, say, visa formalities. For UK citizens required an e-visa to enter Turkey, but I believe that they're no longer required for stays under 90 days once things obviously resume back to normal. So anyway, that's just a bit of extra information for anybody about the visa entry. And again, obviously these things are subject to change, of course. Anything else, Diana, that you would like to add? Maybe about Silk Road, perhaps?
Yeah, well, obviously, just looking at that map, you can see exactly how the Silk Road, you know, clearly this is the land bridge into Europe without a shadow of a doubt. And so the enormous amounts of trade east-west that move, and most of these places, of course, are all built on trade. And the reason a lot of the civilizations here became so wealthy was because of their trade in both directions. And it's enabled the it's what's enabled the region to be so varied and so multicultural. You do get a sense of that when you're there. The different layers of civilizations, and they've all left their mark there, and you can sense that. So it gives you a real perspective on history generally, traveling around parts of the world like this, where you know where human history began.
Yeah, and we do have obviously a Silk Road through Turkey tour as well, which takes in, you know, many of the main sites and places that were on the Silk Road. So I mean, again, there is more information, you know, obviously on our website about that. But Dana, I think we will have to kind of wrap up the questions and answers now. But thanks again, obviously for your talk and presentation, and apologies to everybody who had audio problems during the presentation. If you do have any questions about traveling to Turkey or any other destinations, and please do obviously have a look at our website. We will be hosting kind of more online events in the coming months. We're still in the process of organizing a few more speakers for this, but hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we will be putting up another talk. So do check our events page kind of periodically. And of course, you would receive a newsletter on that as well. And just on a final note, we will be announcing our new no deposit policy very soon. That's right. Basically, you'll be able to book a trip without any financial commitment. We will send more information about this once it's finalized. So do look out for that when we send out the newsletter on that. So yes, thank you all again for attending this talk. Again, Diana, to yourself as well for sparing your time for this. And yeah, to everybody, just take care and stay safe. And hopefully see you at the next talk. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.